The reference is from the Vedanta Treatise, the Eternities, chapter 8. So it's talking about this section, the personality chart, in which we are assessing the personality across different domains using the 3 mental temperaments as a measure. So we'll get more into that as we go through the answer. But the question states, Rajasic action arises from likes and dislikes and is coupled with craving. How would we categorize an action that springs from likes and dislikes, is not your obligation, and is not coupled with a craving for the fruit, and is thus free-flowing? Okay, so the question here is saying that when we look at these mental temperaments of Tamas, Rajas, Sattva, these define a certain way of relating to our actions. So if we are Rajasic, which refers to the state of being desire-ridden, driven by our own personal preferences, then the action will be driven by likes and dislikes. The action is dictated by what I like to do or what I don't like to do. I like exercising, so I do it even when I'm injured, or I don't like exercising, so I don't do it even though I should. Simple. It's also coupled with craving. I want the result, I want the result. So the highest quality of action is that action which is done because it's your obligation, not because you're attached to the action, the result. It's not done simply because you like it. The other aspect of a sattvic action is that it is effortless, it flows. We're familiar with that notion of flow state, where the action seems to be being done by our nature and we're sort of along for the ride. The effortlessness of it. When you compare that to a rajasic action, one which is driven by personal preferences, it's the opposite of that. It's done because I want it, because I like it, because I want the result. And because it's being done as an expression of ego, there will be a part of our personality, we talk about the conscience, which does not support it. So the reason that a sattvic action flows easily is because it is supported by the entire personality, including those subtle dimensions like the conscience. Rajasic action is selfish, so the conscience cannot support it. So it feels like we're moving into a headwind. There's so much effort that needs to go in. So how do we categorize an action that does spring from likes and dislikes? Okay, that would be rajas. It's not your obligation, so that would be rajas. No craving for the fruit, which is sattva, and is thus free-flowing. So the question has observed, perhaps in themselves or others, that this action is done purely because they want to. It's not part of their obligation. There's no craving for the result, and it seems to have that free-flowing aspect to it. How do we categorize it? So the thing to remember about the 3 mental temperaments, the gunas, is that when we split it up into this, we're looking at how each guna expresses, if that guna alone were to be functioning. But the thing to remember is that every expression of the personality is a mixture of all 3 qualities. So you can think of it in terms of to the extent that. You can think of it also in terms of multiple seeds sprouting all at once. Multiple interests trying to get their needs met all at once. So you go to your garden and you say, look, I've got these beautiful flowers sprouting, but I've also got these weeds. How is this possible? Same soil. No, it's not the soil that's creating it, it's the seeds underneath it. So when you perform an action, there are multiple interests converging for that action to be initiated and executed. Why are you exercising every morning? Well, there'll be multiple things there. One is, I understand it's my obligation to keep the vehicle in good shape. Another is, I want to reduce my healthcare costs later in life. Another is, I want to look good and get attention from others. So is the action sattvic or rajasic? It's a mixture. So where there is an action that is prompted by likes and dislikes, that will be because of the rajas. Where there is an action where you are not craving for the fruit, that will be because of sattva. So how do you categorize that specific action? Well, it would be an admixture of rajas and sattva. So you can't say it is a sattvic action. You can't say it is a rajasic action. It is an action that has these multiple aspects to it. And this is the final output. So the idea of trying to fit every action, it's either sattvic, or it's rajasic, or it's tamasic, is not going to be helpful, because we're an admixture of all three at all times. So when we are going through the self-analysis, how does sattva express, and where does it express in my actions? How frequently? How does rajas express, and how frequently does that express in my actions, and so forth, rather than trying to categorize or squeeze separate actions into one only of these boxes. So how will we categorize it? As an admixture of rajas and sattva. And then you can start to apportion. Okay, it seems like it's 60-70% sattva and about 30-40% rajas, or vice versa. So that again comes from the self-analysis. The other part of the question states that it is not coupled with a craving for the fruit, and thus free-flowing. So it's important that we understand what we mean by free-flowing. If we are performing an action purely because the ego demands it, I like it, I like the action itself, and I want to do it because it achieves this ego-centered outcome, there may still be what appears to me as a feeling of flow. But this is not the free-flowing that we're trying to talk about or convey with the idea of sattva. Just because the mind is going along with something doesn't make it sattva. And if the mind is going along with something, it can feel to us like this is a good action moving forward. The free-flowing is really that state of objectivity where we're able to stand apart from it. Whereas the rajasic sense of free-flowing is more a feeling of being with the action. So you could imagine being in a river, on an inner tube, flowing with the river. Now you might say, it's like that, I'm free-flowing. But if you're on an inner tube in the river, you don't have any control. You are being carried by the water. In a similar way, if you are in the flow of rajas, and it's an action that you like, and you're getting the outcome that you like, then it can feel like you are in that feeling of flow, but again, you have no control. You are being acted through by your rajas. So the real test would be, what would happen if all of a sudden you came up against a rock? Bang! The action stops, you stop moving, and you're frustrated because you want to get around it. So what would happen if you are in that feeling of flow, apparently, and all of a sudden the outcome is inhibited? How do you react? Is there any frustration there? That would indicate that there is a dependency on the result, that there is a craving for the result. It's not always easy to see the craving or the dependency upon the result if we're getting what we want. Usually it's only when we stop getting what we want that we can start to feel, oh, that craving was there all along. If that action is springing purely from likes and dislikes and it's not your obligation, it means it's being prompted by the ego. That being the case, it's very unlikely that there isn't any dependency upon the result happening. It's perhaps simply that it hasn't shown itself yet because the circumstances or the environment is not conducive for that. We haven't come across any barriers, and so the demand hasn't turned into frustration yet. So this is again one of the characteristics of rajas, is that we are involved, and so we don't really see what's going on until opposition from the environment shows us. So how would we categorize an action that springs from likes and dislikes, is not your obligation, and is not coupled with a craving for the fruit? Mixture of sattva and rajas.